Should we start with our introductions?
Yep.
Starts off. My name is Reed Jordan, and this is the first POC sci-fi book I've read since The City We Became, and just a great reminder of how amazing this genre is. I'm super excited.
My name is Lawrence Bariner. I think this is also, well, this is my first sci-fi by Samuel Delany ever. And I don't even know what else to say. I really love this book. It really screwed me up for a long time. And then I was like, that's what I'm going to say for now.
Cool. Lafayette Cruz. Yeah, this is also my first Samuel Delany book. And I kept having to look at the publishing date to remind myself that this wasn't written today, but was written in the 60s. And how are you so good at this? How are you so the foresight and the prescience and the imagination, and just how different our world would be if more people read Samuel Delany. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this book.
That's a good ass question. How different would our world be if more people read Samuel Delany?
Oh my gosh.
Be different.
Should we just kind of build off that question?
That's a great question. Let's start there.
I mean, I feel for me, it emerged mostly from just even just the casualness of different relationship types, and the fact that a polyamorous couple, it wasn't questioned, it wasn't named, it just was, and it was essential, and it was well understood. And I'm oh, how controversial was this in the 60s when you wrote it? Because I can imagine, even today, people do not understand polyamory, but you put it in. Yeah, I was just you understand a different way, both understood it and then were able to write about it in a world in a way that doesn't seem that's not noteworthy.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't need to be explained. It just was.
Yeah. But yeah, just what would our relationships be like if we were just cool, if we understood the diversity of relationship types?
Dang. I mean, I want to think about that, and I also just really appreciate you naming that he wrote this in the 60s. And that was 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Just truly, what was it like when he was writing this? I mean, I guess I know the US has had different eras of, radical exploration of free love and all those things, but to be I mean, he was one of the first big Black sci-fi writers. I don't even know if he was that big, but he was one of the first Black sci-fi writers. Octavia Butler was whoa,
yeah,
if this guy's doing it, I can do it. So to be that bold, just I'm just gonna write what I'm writing. It's impressive.
You wrote this at 23, 20 something?
Yeah, it is early 20s. Yeah. It's shit like this that makes me think, damn, what am I doing? And then I think I'm doing fine stuff, but it does make me, I have that little blip.
Yeah.
But to your actual point, what would it be like if we just understood the diversity of relationship types? Yeah, I think there would be a lot more happy people.
Truly. Were you gonna say something, Reed?
I was thinking about your original question, generally, what do we think the world would be like if people would have read Samuel Delaney, read this book? This might be jumping ahead a little bit, but I love the distinction between like the transport people and the customs people, where it's like the customs people are like very straight laced, and I think it's the customs who like only know how to move through space using like normal mechanics and like normal like fusion drives, but then the transport people use like hyperstasis, which I don't entirely know how it works, and they have these like wild crews of like the polyamorous couples and like the like ears, nose,
The
mouth,
discorporate.
like this corporate. Like, are these ghosts? Are these computers?
They're
And
ghosts.
it's like it's more art than science. So it's
Yeah.
like two totally different sets of people who are using the same like different methods of getting to different like the same place. I think it's a really helpful framework for like understanding just like general things in the world of like, oh, we might want to get to the same place, but you're doing it like totally differently. I'm doing it totally differently. And maybe we can't really understand each other, but like we're still kind of going to the same place. Yet like the way we get there, it's like so different. It's hard for us to like communicate and see each other. So I just like love that distinction. It was like a whole. It seems like that's like the entirety of like how like in some ways society is organized. It's like these major distinctions of how people clearly like move through space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that it just made me think of even just like the like the fluidity of like community in that, because like it seemed like the transport people, I don't know, just like everything felt so intimate, but they're able to like very quickly come in together to run the ship and to be together. And like, yeah, I don't know. I just imagine like what I always go back to, like what does a neighborhood look like when you allow for that like fluidity, but then also like discrete roles, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. I think about that probably on a daily basis. I literally had a conversation about it today. I was talking to a friend about part of my vision for the economy. I guess it's my personal vision, and it might show up at like macroeconomic scales or at least community economic scales. Like I truly want to work 6 weeks a year, and I want everyone to like have a lane, fucking be like hella good at your lane, have there be many like multiple people in your community who can play that role, and then like over the arc of a year, like if my role is as a facilitator, there need to be like 8 other facilitators on the roster, and each of us will be like on deck for the community for like 6 weeks at a time. Like I want to work for my 6 weeks, and then I want the rest of my time off, and other people should be able to step in when is needed. And if like we have the roles like all this way, and like the different people who can do it this way, and like we have a comprehensive system, and like none of us has to work that much, and like we have the whole thing figured out, and no one has to have an unfair burden. Anyways, that's a very specific way to just say I think about that shit all the time. And I think it would be mad beautiful. Like I think it's so possible for us to just really have a different way of organizing ourselves that is more life-giving, more free, more rooted in reality instead of this like fuck shit extractive shenanigans that we've been running for centuries now. Yeah, I just think it'll be great.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because it feels like even the story, there's something about like queer and of color alternatives to existing that we like embody and practice within the broader context of like imperialism. Because like it's funny, I think of the story and I keep forgetting, like, oh, that's right. They're in the middle of like an intergalactic war. And like they're kind of related to it. And that's like the impetus for the story, but it's also not super it's not like the point of the story. It's not the point of the relationship. It's not the point of their existence. And even though like when they go to the other planet, everyone's like, wow, these transport folks are so interesting and weird. Like, I don't know. For like the crew is like, whatever, you guys do your own thing. We're just going to exist and not be bothered by it, even if there is an intergalactic war going on. I don't know. I think there's just something. It's like that Alicia Wormsley billboard, there are Black people in the future. It's like there are going to be these communities existing and embodying an alternative in the future. I don't know. Actually no, I do know. That's why I said it. But
Great catch. Great catch.
yeah. But it does. It makes me think of just like what does it mean like to embody this local economy that you're talking about as it like floats through space with a discorporate crew and a bunch of grunts and teams and stuff, or like whatever the version of that is today.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that today. Like something that's so it's like people working on a goal that's super intergenerational and it's like such a mix of different communities and people, like all in a, I don't know, maybe some movements are similar to that, like the spaceship of like 12 teenagers and like the boss to like move them to like get them to like do their work and like not goof off, and like this corporate, like we don't have that. We don't have like I'm trying to imagine like what would be a work environment that would allow for that, or like would have like something that contains all that like randomness and mixture of things, and like the randomness and mixture of things is what needed to actually make it work, like make it like move. And I don't think we have like an analogy for something like that.
I have so many thoughts about that,
Yeah.
and I think it's going to take us off track because I want to talk more about the actual book because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Also, Reed, there's a weird echo thing happening. I think when we're talking and you're unmuted, it like has a weird crunchy feedback. Are you hearing that, Lafayette? Yeah. So either if you could stay muted or if you have headphones, I think that might solve it.
We don't have headphones. Good back.
Sweet. Oh damn! I don't know if you can still hear us.
Maybe. I don't know how loud he is or how far the headphones are.
Yeah, I don't know how far the headphones are. This is funny. Well, I'm gonna start saying a thing. Yeah, I really want to talk about that community thing. I guess, okay, the one sentence thing I'll say is I do think in some movements and in some communities, especially communities that honor ancestors, like the discorporate are kind of just like ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
so that's what I was thinking about them. I was like, oh yeah, they're just like ancestor status. They're more active than ancestors, but like you could totally just roll with your ancestors like as if
yeah.
they were your eyes and ears and nose maybe. Okay. Anyways, it's a whole other thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But what I wanted to bring up about the book was, okay, there's so many things, truly so many things. One detail just in the like polyamory thing, maybe I'll start there. Like, I just love that there was queerness, but it wasn't like overwhelming. Like Simon Delaney is queer.
Yeah.
And like in the little trio, the thruple that does the like what is it, like their nervous system like helps control the ship, like the quality of their dynamic is like what helps the ship maneuver. Like that's first of all fucking cool. Second of all, love it. And there was just like that one little scene where I can't remember their names, but like it seemed like the younger male partner in the trio was like outside the party, like feeling really sad, and Rydra
Yeah.
like comes up and is like, oh, here's some relationship coaching. Like super
Love that
cute.
scene.
Such a good scene, maybe my favorite scene. And then when the younger guy was just like talking about like how he physically like manhandles the older guy and like talking about like rubbing his ears, I was like, oh my god, that is so cute.
Right.
So true. Like devastatingly real to my experience. Like I used to rub my ex's ears and it was such a thing. Anyways, and it was like that scene, like it was that one little scene, and then there was just like a bunch of other stuff happening, and I just can't imagine, again, to your point, Lafayette, like this was written in the 60s. It's like present and not like the thing that's happening. Like Samuel Delany is clearly he's like doing a different thing. His point of this book is a different point, and he just weaves in all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, somewhat of a tangent, but I do want to eventually read it. Have you read Midnight's, or was it Empire Star?
Oh, what is that?
It was they reference it in the book. It's one of the books that Rydra has written, and they talk about it in that scene. Is like one of the books she's known for, and he had written it as like a pairing. And
Wait.
so I
didn't know this.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like the
Wait, can we
book
see
that
it?
technically, yeah.
Wow.
So, because the version I got was just like it has it on the other side. But yeah.
Is it short?
Yeah, it's like a novella. I want to say it's like 100 pages.
Oh wow, cool.
So
That's dope. I love the the like referential nature of that. That's really excellent.
yeah, like I really want to read it
great.
because like you did world building within your world building.
That's that black sci-fi life I'm talking about.
The dream.
I want to say one other thing. Oh, you go.
No, go ahead.
I feel like I just talked a lot.
Well, no. Okay. I was just gonna say I wanted to talk about like the role of like language.
Yes, that's where I was gonna go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like I said before we started recording, just like the strangeness of reading this book, and then I don't know if TikTok was watching me or if I was in the mood to like start liking people's videos when they were talking about language or pronunciation, but just like it's also interesting for him to think of computer languages and code as language in a very, I won't say like in the sort of language that we use today to talk about AI, or like the layperson to talk about AI. And to be like, oh, you were writing about this when computers took up an entire room and like had a gig of memory. And you could sort of see, I won't say like humanize, but almost like take computer languages and apply a humanities and linguistics lens to get at this point of like how you construct your language shapes how you view the world, and it shapes how you view yourself and interact with the world. I just like reading that just like blew my mind, and now I'm just like, wait, how does every other language construct itself? How does like how you speak a language shapes how you view the world. How do I view the world? How do I view the world? Because English is my first language, and like Midwestern English is my first language. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like weird that this was like, yeah, it's a sci-fi book, but also like a linguistics book.
And the work she was doing with language, there's so much here. Like there's just so much here. But the work she was doing with language, and that series of paragraphs where Raja was teaching the butcher about you and I, and like
Oh my God.
going back and forth, and like it took me as a reader like a little while to get into the rhythm of it. But I'm like, this is so brilliant. Like the work that you are forcing me to do, like as a reader in this, I had never read anything like that. But, like
Never.
used like played with language like that and played with like the reader's mind like that. It was brilliant.
Brilliant. It was so powerful.
Yeah.
That scene fucked me up. I had to read it twice.
Yeah, I pretty sure I was like reading in the living room, and I just like, I think I like yelled, I like made some noise, and my sister was like, "What's going on?" I was like, let me explain this to you to make sure I understand what's going on, because this is insane." But also like, it is weird to then try and like in engaging with the butcher, be like, "Oh, what does it mean to engage with language and not have I?" Like, what is a concept I do not understand. How would I teach someone I?
Yeah. Yeah. The way she did it was brilliant also. And it really, it like made me think about the ego, and particularly like, men with egos. And it was interesting that, the butcher sort of didn't have an ego, which is partly what which is one of the things that allowed him to be as destructive as he was, like to escape like intergalactic prison and like kill all these people and truly have no remorse, because there was no him to have remorse from. Like there was nothing for the remorse to anchor into. But I was thinking, comparing that to present day, which I feel like like the opposite is true. Like we have people who, like, I'm thinking mostly of men who have like massive egos and will do dumb shit. And I was just, the first layer of reading the book and trying to understand, Lafayette, like you're saying, what would it be like to see the world without yourself in it, without an understanding of an I? But then in our world, I was like, oh, and then what happens if you over assert your I-ness? Do you get the same effect? It does seem like you get some of the same effects. Which, yeah, I don't know if that's what he was trying to do, but if that was what he was trying to do, is very well played, because I don't think I would have seen it so easily. Like I wouldn't have had to do all of the work to try to understand what's happening, because I would have just been like, oh yeah, that's the asshole ego dude.
Yeah.
I would have been in my own assumption land. So it was excellent to not be in my assumption land and have to really think about that. But also, Lafayette, to your point about I guess I want to talk more about how does the language that we currently understand shape the way we see and move in the world. Reed, I'm curious if you have thoughts about that. I have a bunch, but I want to hear you.
Yeah, when I was reading, a couple of things came up for me. Well, the first was like I immediately brought to like theory making and like the work of the work of social movements to like create language and create theory. And then like this language then changes how people see themselves and see the potential for like action. So I thought a lot about that. If we don't have words to describe some of these things that are happening, like, is it hard to make action against them, or is it hard to fully interpret it? I also thought a lot about like kids, like what the process of youth, like development as they're learning words to describe their experiences and describe themselves, and as they're like developing language to make sense of themselves. So I was trying to think back of a time in my life, if there'd ever been a moment where like I learned a word when I was young, and like that word brought so much new meaning to me, like some like so much openness, and like made like a new like vision of like some potential or some like understanding of myself that I didn't previously have. And I couldn't think of a word. I couldn't think come to me. I was just imagine that like those moments where I think moments where I have become like really expansive are certainly attached to like new words and new language and new understanding of things. Yeah, that's what came up for me.
I'm remembering the scene in the book where he was talking about, I think it was Babel-17 versus whatever, I guess English or whatever language they were speaking, how Babel-17 could describe, I forget the exact thing, it was like Babel-17 could describe like the schematics for this entire ship.
Was it?
Do you remember?
Was it? It was like the one heat seeking, or like the one species where like their language is related to heat.
Yes.
They had a word for like this entire energy conductor, and they could recreate it with just like a few words.
Yes. And it took like many, many, many words in another language to describe the same thing. And, you know, it goes back to what you were saying. It's like very much about what are we talking about, and how are we seeing the thing that we're talking about? Like, how are we defining the thing we're talking about? And yeah, that is just so important. And, you know, okay, so adjacent point, but we'll come back to what we're talking about now. A friend of mine, Gopal Dayaneni, who's like one of the members in Movement Generation, one of the cooperative members at Movement Generation. He talks, and MG talks a lot about the number of, like the percentage of verbs in a language. It's like many indigenous languages have more verbs than nouns. And so what that does to your worldview is it means that there's more about action than there is about stasis or staticness. Like English as a language that is mostly nouns is about naming and codifying and classifying things. And specifically, it's about delineating things from each other. There's a lot of nouns because there's a lot of different things. So it's like, it's really about separating things and putting them into their categories. And many indigenous languages are more verbs. And what that shows, or one of the ways to interpret that, is like things are a lot more about change and about relationship than about being individual entities in and of themselves. Like if your language is mostly verbs, the way things relate to each other are like things are in motion all the time. So it doesn't actually make sense to talk about a thing outside of relationship with the other things that are acting on it or that it is acting on. And so when you then think about like, okay, of course, English as a colonizer language, like, yeah, of course they want to roll into places and like need names for things so that they can like conquer that. I mean, okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but like when the way you see the world is about things as opposed to relationships or actions, it's much easier to dominate a thing than it is to be in a dominant relationship with that thing. Like if you understand that you are a part of a web of relationships, it makes a lot less sense to dominate shit. It still does, you know, there are definitely many indigenous cultures that have strong lineages of domination. So it's not like I'm saying, you know, it's all perfect, but it just makes sense that the way English works shapes how English speakers see the world. You know, so just going back to your earlier point, Lafayette, like English as a language that, you know, the three of us speak as first language, right? Like this is your first language too, Reed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we see the world in things. We learned to see the world in things rather than to see the world in relationships. And that is, it's got a particular effect.
Interesting. I don't know how related this is to the book other than like even just like how language adopts new information and like rules and patterns of language. Like I think that was the thing that was interesting to me in thinking about like Babel-17 is like there was, I mean, I don't fully understand Babel-17. I wish I could, but the fact that there are like rules to how it like interacts with the world, where like I remember that was a difficulty with me in like learning French and Arabic. It's like, oh, there are rules to how you construct words or how you construct new words or how you add things to the language. Whereas English is very much like, I like that, I will take that and use it however I want to.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and so it just like it makes it, because like I was even just like trying to compare it to other difficult languages to learn. It's like Cantonese is hard, but that's because you have to learn the rules. And then once you know the rules, you can then engage with it. Whereas English is like the rule, just it's weird.
There are no rules.
There are rules, but there are also lots of exceptions.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it makes new rules for things that come from other set of rules. And then it also, yeah, it's just like, because it's like I remember once I learned like some of the rules for Arabic. It's like, oh, as long as I know these things, I can make up a new. I like can kind of get to the word that I want. Whereas in English, I'm like, I'm gonna have to use a bunch of words. I don't know. There was like no form I can plug this into and create something new. Or there's no like uniform way for us to determine what this actually. I mean, kind of, but there's like no uniform way to look at this word and figure out what it means if you don't already know. It's like it's Greek or it's Latin or it's Romance or it's indigenous. But again, to your point, it like then shapes how, I guess I was thinking about like it shapes how we view even just like culture and things. Like if everything is an object that can then be brought into this language and used however we want, that's the same with like this piece of culture. You've given me the name, I like it, I will use it however I want, and it is part of this broader lexicon, and I don't fully appreciate what it means, where it comes from, how it's constructed. But yeah, so yeah, it made me very, I do wonder like what language they were speaking. Like, is it intergalactic English? Is there some other way? Is it something, what are they speaking? Because it felt like going all the way back to the previous point I made about just like alternative ways of being with like the transport versus the customs folks. Like, yeah, there was a class hierarchy, but it didn't feel quite as oppressive, if that makes sense. Like they weren't existing, like the transport crowd wasn't existing in opposition to, like, I feel like when we propose alternatives, it is for survival. because there is a dominant class that is trying to assimilate and or kill our beings that are being different, or us being non like white, straight, heteronormative, whatever. Whereas here it felt like there was a way to exist without them. There was an appreciation for this alternative way of existing, if that makes sense. Actually, now that I say that, I don't know how true that is. But it felt different. It felt like there wasn't the same sort of threat of their existing to their existence and being different.
Yeah, I think that like security officers, like wild nights in transport land, is more like like a little kid being lost in like a world that he just didn't know and understand, and like was told to him like by their parents as like this boogeyman world of unknowns, and had no idea how to navigate it. Like went in, got like captured by like a succubus, and everyone was like, "Oh, ha ha ha!" Like that's a first night. That like you only do that when you're here for your first time. Like
Rookie.
just couldn't understand. It's like couldn't understand it. It's like this world like just so beyond his experience that like he needed this navigator, Raja, to like help him even like make sense of it. And even then, with this like navigator at his side, he still like only brushed the surface. And then after that, like he had this transformative realization of like, oh my gosh, this person just like gave me insight into this world that's incredible and potentially changed my life. If I hadn't been with that person that night, like I'd still just be Joe customs agents. But like I love that. Yeah. So I think it was like you just don't even know, like you don't know what's beyond the curtain, and you gotta go there and like spend a lot of time and sit with it. Otherwise, you'll just have no idea, and someone will define it for you. Like someone will tell you what it is.
Another tangent.
Oh, I was just saying, I do.
Yeah, did you want to go?
Oh no, were you going to go on a tangent, or did you want to respond to that?
I have an adjacent tangent, but
Okay.
if you want to respond to that, you should go.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I do wonder, in this world that he's constructed, if like having to engage with multiple species not from this planet shapes sort of their comfortability with difference, but I don't fully know. Because at the same time, like their engagement with the war feels very reminiscent of like imperialism and this like this unknown enemy that will not conform to us. Like it's been a while since I read it, but like I don't remember if they gave any context for like why they were at war.
No, there's none.
Yeah, and that just felt very familiar. Of just like we're at war.
Yeah,
it just is.
Yeah,
it's so American. We don't know how to not be at war.
Yeah.
Was this written before the Vietnam War? I guess it was.
Had to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, although it's probably like Korean War.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The tangent I was going to make was about, I'm listening to this podcast. What the fuck is it called? The United States of Anxiety. You know this show?
No.
I don't know it other than my friend, I think my friend Manav sent me this episode about ending the dominion of men. You know, it's like definitely in my like patriarchy work lane. But they're talking to this woman who's a historian of women's rights work. And I just listened to the chunk where she was describing when women got together and created the term sexual harassment. And like there was a time before that term existed. And what she was saying about social movements is that there's often energy swirling around something that is just amorphous and is unable to be molded into a political force until some group or some subset of the movement like names a thing. The women had been upset about their oppressive treatment in the workplace for a long time, but until this like group of women got together and defined like sexual harassment as like unwanted approaches or actions that make you feel uncomfortable in your work context, there was nothing to collectively rally behind and say to other people, are you having this experience? Are you being sexually harassed just like I am? Because like otherwise it just gets like colloquial terms. It's like, oh, he's pestering you. That was like the phrase that, and I've heard that phrase like from that era before. It was like, oh, pestering. And like women would like tell each other like, oh yeah, you should expect for him to pester you if you get this job. But for it not to be codified. Anyways, okay, so that's a specific thing, but just to say, like, you know, how your language defines things or doesn't define things does really give you access to quickly moving through shared experience, information, transmission, etc. And I was really thinking about how Redra was saying that Babel-17 was so fast compared to English. And I have so many thoughts about that. But one last thing I'll say for a bit is like, English is really clunky, particularly because of, I mean, I would project that it's because of its like appropriative nature. It's like not based on a single set of rules, like you were saying, Lafayette. It's like, I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And because of that stance, it's not consistent. So to learn it, you have to learn all these fucking intricacies. And that makes it a really clunky and slow communication mechanism, actually.
Yeah. Interesting. It's interesting that, like, one, the swirling metaphor, and then the like speed of Babel-17. Because I feel like after reading this, I was telling my parents, it's like, oh, or just like telling my family, it's like language is trying to give like the sensations that we're perceiving, trying to approximate a way to transfer that sensation to someone else. And just imagining a language that gets past the needing to translate those sensations into something else. Or even like, yeah, just like thinking of the process of feeling or experiencing a sensation, translating it and like noting that your sensation, trying to define it. Both like not even like giving it a definitive term, but just like processing like this is a sensation. And then from there, trying to go through your brain to find a way to give language to that, whether it's like verbal, nonverbal, whatever. It's just like, what is the language that just gets past that?
Yeah. I would love a language that could translate, that could just transmit emotion and experience. And it's like purist and didn't need this intermediary of like words to like try to provide that. I don't know. Like sometimes I think physical touch does that. Like, not. I think it's like says things in like words. You know, like this can't.
Everything physical touch can do that.
Yeah.
Which is part of why Like one of the things I really believe about what will dismantle toxic patriarchy in our era is like men holding each other, because there's so much that is communicated, so much, I don't know if I want to say more, but there's so much that can be communicated by like healthy physical intimacy.
Yeah.
And because we have almost none of that, we're just like walking around with like our tongue split in half or something. Like the way that we're able to communicate is like so hindered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel you read on the like, yeah, on that point.
It does. Like when Rydra and the Butcher sort of like, I guess, mind meld. I don't know. That's just what it seemed to me. It was just like mind melding. But it also made me feel like.
You mean like at the end of the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It made me think of is it the Oankali?
Yes.
It's interesting. I feel like ever
right.
since I read that, I've just been like, oh, I think this is like what we are trying to get to be able to share sensations, and like the best we can do is with words and with touch and with act, like all these things. But we're trying to get to a point where we are discrete, but also one, and just together in there. But that requires a comfortability of being both discrete, but also intimate, and everything. Yeah. I mean, to your point, Lawrence, of just like, I remember I went to like a ecstatic dance thing. Or actually, being in Boston made me realize like, oh, I enjoy dancing, but also the reason I need someone who likes to dance is because you have to be comfortable with your body. Like, have to be comfortable with your body reacting to the sensation of sound, and have to be comfortable with your body reacting. And there is so much in our culture, just this fear of like the self and the body in all of its self. And so there's no, like, even if there, I don't think there would be a way for us to get Babel-17, because there's too much fear of that speed and that intimacy and that like knowledge of self. Yeah. I was like, yeah, no, more men just need a hug. Just need a hug. Hold hands with your friends.
Yo, hold hands with your friends, especially your dude friends if you're a dude.
Like, I've started doing this thing before I was like meditating. Yeah, I started doing this thing because I kept having these visions of like my higher self kissing me on the forehead. And so now before I go to bed, I like say goodnight to my brother and sister and give them a kiss on the forehead. And just like, but just like, so I guess that's to your intro question. That's another thing I learned is like, I want to be more affectionate in my touch. And like, I need that, but also want to show that. And I want to start modeling that. And then going to try and introduce that more into my relationships with my friends who are comfortable with it, which was like, we need to be close. I want to be close. I need that as a person. And I want that as a person. And I would like to share that with my friends as a person.
Will you say what the intro question was? Because I don't think we were recording then.
What the question was, what have we learned about ourselves over the course of the pandemic?
And Reed, that was a question you said you asked to some of your students.
Did answer the students class, and I didn't hear the answers, but I heard it was a good question to ask.
Spoken like a true lecturer / professor. I don't know what they said, but they said it was a good question. So my job here is done. Exactly. Okay, so we've been on this language kick for a bit. there are other things also in this book.
Mhm.
So maybe I'm gonna just make like 2 or 3 quick points, like interesting points, and maybe y'all could share some other things that came up for you.
But one more thing on the language piece before we
Oh,
leave, though,
please.
that I feel like we have to get to is that Babel-17 ultimately is a weapon, right? Like that's entirely what this thing was designed to do. And like embedded in the language, like they taught like some of the words in the language were almost like code to get people to think in a certain way, to like see certain communities as enemies. Like that community's name would literally mean like enemy or like destroyer in the language. So it's like that piece, like in terms of like the actual like translation. And the piece of like if you are sitting in this language for long enough, like within it is a bug that will induce some type of like mental illness or psychosis. And that really fucked me up. Like thinking about that really fucked me up. I was like, damn. Because I thought like, okay, are there certain things in languages I know, like if I were to sit with it for a really long time, it's like grind on it over and over and over and over again, like would it lead me to have like, I don't know, like a psychotic episode, or like lead me to have like a extremely stressful, it would lead me to like fundamentally change who I am if I just like sat in this like maybe like a limited cluster of words or ideas, and like that's all I had was like this clustering words of ideas, and I just was like deep in it, and like this language only allowed me to like be within that confines. So I don't know, that like it really scared me thinking about that. I'm like, damn, this would be such a powerful weapon. It'd be so incredible. It'd be and so effective. Yeah. What did y'all think about that? Like, I guess that's kind of like the big reveal of the book, I think, in some ways. But
Do you want to go first?
I mean, I was. What do I think about that? I mean, it made me think about English for sure.
mm-hmm.
It's just like, are there some things about English that are toxic or that create a worldview with a very particular set of outcomes, like a basically predefined set of outcomes, even if they're not intentional, like even if no one like sat down and was like, here's what we want English to do. When I think about, it made me think about English as a language that might just be inherently destructive. You know, and then I also thought about this has been true in other sci-fi books too, like the inherent value in being able to exist and move through the world in multiple languages. Like speaking Basque to the Discorporate and then English to everyone else, and then learning Babel-17. Like, and I remember there's some moments, I can't, I noted them, but I can't find them right now. Like the sensation of when you like wake up in a new language, like when you've learned enough parts of a language to like be able to dream in that language or to be able to think in that language. Because like sometimes you have to like hear the language, translate it into your language, think in your root language, and then translate it back out. But when you can think in a language, I mean, it's like a super joyful feeling, but being able to go between them, I think really helps. I've experienced that having helped me like be able to look at my root language from a third perspective, or from different another perspective, which allows me to see the language for what it actually is, as opposed to just assuming what I think it is based on what it tells me it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. It's what you mentioning. It's funny. I'd forgotten that it was weapon because I was so, despite knowing that's the end, that wasn't like the interesting part to me. But I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. but I think like the point of even just like how the point I made about like English and just like how it appropriates and like does not see a boundary with the words or like any anything it can use and appropriate into itself. And I feel like having had to learn like French and Arabic and learn different rules and different rules for like introducing new words into the language, it was like you were saying, Lawrence, it does force you to like understand that it is a worldview and it's not like absolute. But like if you have a language like English that sort of has this myth of like you can be a part of us and we'll like appropriate your words with someone familiar, it does become the sort of mirage of a language that seems a lot more universal than it is. And that does become an interesting weapon for like, yeah, an interesting weapon for like colonization and like taking over. Because it is adaptable enough to like create a bunch of pigeons, if that makes sense.
A bunch of pigeons.
Yeah. So it's like
pigeon languages. Yeah.
yeah. But there isn't the same sort of like formal. It's not like French where there's a formal like body saying this is what is actual French, this is what actual English. But there is a sort of like you are speaking in English, but informally there is actual proper English, and that's how we will then convince you to keep trying to aspire to this. And there isn't actually a rule, so there's no way to actually achieve this. And yeah, I remember again, just like studying Arabic and learning the forms, like this is so much easier. Why is language not like this? And it is just a tricky tool. It's a tricky weapon. And it's an easy way to like make you forget that it is like being used against you.
Which is totally why fucking indigenous boarding schools are so terrible. Also why missionaries are so terrible. Because they really just roll in and like, oh, we're going to teach you our language. Thereby embedding the worldview.
And more than we're going to teach you our language, you cannot learn this other language.
Yeah, and we will physically harm you if you speak your other languages or language. Whew. The layers, fam.
But what were your points?
Team, I don't know. That shit was like miles ago. Let me think. Well, okay, so maybe what I'll say is
Weapons.
Parallels to other books we have read in this crew, or just like other Black sci-fi authors. So there was definitely, I think the character's name was Callie, who was really good at marbles.
Oh yeah.
Unseen. And I was like, oh, this is like Binti. Like this is like a very Binti character for like Nnedi Okorafor's book. Just like,
Oh, Binti.
right? Don't you remember Binti?
I still need to read that.
What are you doing? What the heck? No, it's fine. It's like Black women leaders being young and also just like hella spectacular. Like, yeah, I'm only 14, but I'm gonna unite these warring tribe, like these warring intergalactic tribes in my actual body. It's fine.
Okay.
So, that was one. Definitely the mind meld felt like Octavia in Lilith's Brood. Like,
Yeah.
the Oankali, just like, as you grow up, you're like, okay, I gotta go in and like figure out how to be with all my people and think all the thoughts all together before I can make a decision. Which was like Akeen. I think that was the
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So there was that. I think there was something else about water that reminded me of some other thing that we read, but I fully can't remember it. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there until I can find this other point in my notes.
Along the lines of connections to other book, the definitely like the intergalactic war is a minor kind of note of the true story. I feel like it's such a theme of so many of the authors we've read of like they're not about massive battles between empires and like huge like warring intercontinental or intergalactic like space sagas. Like that's just like a thing that's happening, but the real thing is like all these little relationship dynamics and like little things that you're unteasing between these characters and like the depth and complexity of these characters. And I think that's just like, to me, that's like totally a theme throughout so much of this canon of work. That makes it so different from main like white people POC or from white people sci-fi.
That's a really good point. That's a very, very good point. It's like, yes, there's this big backdrop thing happening, but what we're talking about is all these little things. Yeah. And there does seem to be like a fascination with large scale war that captures white imaginations.
Yeah. It was funny. I just remember asking the question last summer of just like, what was it like for the average like Roman citizen as like Rome was falling? Like, yeah, we learned like those peoples had to keep living. Not everyone died. That didn't part of the earth didn't just like disappear. People kept going. And what does it mean to like keep going? Because and I guess going back to like Babel-17 as a weapon, just like thinking about that banquet scene and just like the pride and the like weird callousness of, was it the Baron, the Duke, or whatever, just like, look at all of our terrible weapons, whatever. Yeah. And just like, this, aren't you impressed? This is so cool. We can kill so many people in so many cool ways. And then to like die by one of his weapons. But like, yeah, it was just like, it is weird. I mean, I think even just like being at MIT, of just like being face to face with people who are so in love with death, and so casual with like death. And actually, I think it's also just like being in America, just like we excel at death and how to just like continue moving on and like sitting there awkwardly observing as people celebrate death and your contribution to that, or what they think is a contribution to that, but still just like being like, I'm not a part of this, or like I'm kind of a part of this, but I'm not who you think I am. Yeah.
Well, should we share final thoughts? I said that one because it's 9:30 and I'm sleepy.
I'm about to say it. I'm hungry.
Sleepy too. I'm sleepy too.
Getting too old for this.
Yeah.
Got to record earlier.
Yeah.
Is there anything? Oh, Reed, were you gonna say something?
No.
Is there anything, having read this book, that you're going to do differently in your life?
I had been thinking about relearning Spanish for a long time, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to do it. I'm not sure this really changed it, but it reminded me of some of the joys of learning another language. I got excited and a little bit giddy from those feelings again. Too. think about and learn and experience the world through another language.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm fully ready to start like learning a language again, but it does put me back in the mode of just like slowing down and thinking about the language, and even just like it's forced me to like slow down and think about the language and the models that I use to come to the conclusions that I do. Yeah.
I think I'm team Reed on this one. Like, so many of my close friends are Spanish speaking. I really should just fucking get back on my Spanish game. I had a great Duolingo streak for a while. And I think I should just do it again, because I do really appreciate the way that knowing a different language allows you to see the world differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want that.
Here's
Okay,
speaking
bye.
Spanish together.
Here's us speaking Spanish together. Do you speak Spanish already, Lafayette?
No, I was similarly trying to learn it because